Have you ever grown tomato plants only to find that your flowers didn't turn into tomatoes? It is so frustrating. You might want to consider hand pollinating. I've been vegetable gardening for 7 years now, and I did not start hand pollinating my tomatoes until the last few years, and I cannot believe how much of a difference it has made in my tomato harvest. So I'm going to tell you what I have found to be the easiest, most effective way to hand pollinate your tomatoes. I'll go over the other options that people recommend, but I really want to highlight the one that I think is just the best and has worked for me for several years now. So first of all, how do tomatoes get pollinated? The most commonly known way is by pollinators. So these are going to be bugs like bees that come and visit your plant. They go on the flowers and they move the pollen around so that the flowers can pollinate and then turn into tomatoes. Another way is by wind. So when it's really windy, it mimics that vibration of the bee or the pollinator on those flowers, and the pollen is then able to get moved around to where it needs to go. And the third way is by hand pollination, which we're going to talk about. So tomatoes are self-pollinating. This is different than something like a zucchini, where there is a male and a female flower, and the pollen needs to go from the male to the female in order for that flower to be pollinated and create that zucchini. With tomatoes, the flower as an individual flower contains both the male and the female parts. And so this means that those flowers can self-pollinate. This makes it really easy for them to be pollinated by hand compared to other plants where you have to take one flower and make sure that you're transferring it to another. So if you look at a tomato flower, you'll see petals kind of around the outer rim of it. And then in the middle, there's a cone-shaped portion of that flower. And this is what's important for pollinating. So the pollen needs to go from the tip to kind of that base of the cone. And like I said, there are a few different ways that people recommend that you do this. First, I'm going to talk about the two that are definitely options, but that I personally don't do, and then I'll share which one I use to pollinate my tomatoes. So the first way that you can do it is to take a Q-tip or a brush with a small head of bristles. And what you're going to do is you're going to take that and you're going to kind of just make circular motions around the center of that flower. You don't have to do it very long, just enough to really get that pollen moved throughout the flower for it to be able to pollinate. If you are going to do this option, you want to just make sure that when you go from one tomato plant to another, if they are different varieties, you want to make sure you're using either a new Q-tip or brush or that you're cleaning that brush off. And this is because you will end up cross-pollinating the pollen, and so that flower won't end up making that true variety. It's going to be a cross of all the different ones that you've been pollinating with that brush or Q-tip. Another option is to take an electric toothbrush, turn it on, and hold it up to that cluster of flowers. Now this is similar to what I do, but it's just kind of taking it one more step. This feels a little extra to me. Some people do this and it works great, but I just don't have an extra electric toothbrush laying around. So what I do instead, and this is what I think is the easiest way, is to just tap that cluster of flowers. You want to just tap it several times. Don't overdo it. You don't need to do it really rough, just a light tapping, enough to dislodge that pollen and get it moving around the flowers. When you do this, it mimics that vibrating of the pollinator wings on that cluster of flowers. So when something like a bee visits your flowers, the pollen does get on their legs and on their body, and that's one way that it's moving around and pollinating the other flowers. But also with the self-pollinating flowers, the vibrating of those wings is creating that pollen to get moved around that flower. Like I said, that is the easiest way that I have found. I know it sounds so simple that it might not work, but I personally have been doing it for years and it works great. I come out and I do it even on the same cluster every few days, just in case. But again, just a light tapping is all you need to do. Let's talk about why you might need to hand pollinate your flowers. There's a few different reasons. One reason is if you live on a balcony where there might not be a lot of bugs visiting your plants, or in another area where you just don't have a lot of pollinators visiting your garden. If that's the case for you, you might want to consider hand pollinating. Another reason is if you are living somewhere where it gets really, really hot in the summer. For me personally, we are under a heat advisory where I live here in Missouri. And so what happens when it's really, really hot out is those pollinators are less likely to come out during the day and visit your garden. And so you're going to have less of that pollinating by the bugs. And so that could be another reason why you might want to hand pollinate. There is nothing worse than growing something like a tomato plant and not even getting a harvest out of it. So if your tomato plants are looking really healthy, you don't see any issues, but those flowers just aren't turning into tomatoes, I really recommend try hand pollinating, and that might be the fix for you. I hope you found this helpful and that you have a great gardening season.